Hey everyone, welcome back to another PC port review. Today we're looking at Clair Obscura Expedition 33. Now, a couple of things. I accidentally recorded about over 4 hours of footage for this game because it's actually really fun to play. It's got a great JRPG influence, almost like Persona with like a really cool vibe. So I'm really going to be excited to be finishing it off hopefully later on this year. A couple of things to note off the bat though. When you first start the game up, you are going to be required and basically default set for upscaling. Now there is DLSS, but there is no FSR. This is either TSR with upscaling directly, or it's going to be Intel XeSS, which is kind of annoying, honestly. The problem on top of that, though, is even at epic settings that we're seeing right here, what you're going to notice is that the cutscenes are going to be locked at 30 FPS, and even Intel PresentMon and MSI Afterburner are showing quite a few amount of stutters even inside these locked cutscenes for this frame rate. Not really the best way to start things off, honestly, because unfortunately, things do get a bit wild. As you can see here, we are seeing a CPU bottleneck because the frame rate is of course locked, but the amount of stutters that we're getting and the drops in frame rate and simply cinematics are really concerning. The thing is though, this is going to be, in my opinion, the worst when you're going to be seeing it. The stutters do get pretty dramatic as you saw just now, but they do begin to level off the further you get out of the actual first city and into the open game world. So let's go to the next section and I'll show you guys what I mean. Now, once that first cutscene was over, I dropped everything down to high and we are playing at native resolution. So TSR is set to 100% native and everything along there. We are still getting some frame drops and we are sitting around 65 to 70 FPS. I did disable a couple of things as well. Even though it said epic for TSSR, that just means native res for the just dynamic resolution scaling. But as you can see, as we're moving through the first city, these frame drops are pretty consistent. The good thing is though, we don't have a CPU bottleneck, which means we can use upscaling to get a better frame rate. The problem is it's not going to stop the actual dips that we're seeing for our 1% lows. That's going to be where the real issue comes from. Even though the game looks really great, and every time we turn the camera we get a bit of traversal stutter as well, things don't look good in this first opening area. Thankfully though, it does kind of level off near the end, but it seems to be more of a traversal stutter rather than a shader cache stutter. And as you can see right here with Intel PresentMon, every time a stutter does show, we get a CPU bottleneck in that section. So it seems to also be loading in everything into the area. The big problem I've noticed is though, the more NPCs are around, the more the stutter begins to show itself. So the more you go into certain towns and zones, that's where this really starts to occur. But in the other open area sections where you're just fighting enemies here and there, it does look and feel quite a bit better. Battles also aren't too bad either. In fact, I'll show you guys the tutorial battle here and things start to level off. Now, in terms of what's going on right now, in this certain section, we are sitting at 9.3 gigabytes of VRAM allocated, 7.032 gigs dedicated of VRAM. So if you're on an 8 gigabyte card, you should be okay at medium to high settings, probably with texture resolution. In terms of CPU usage, we're seeing everything being pretty balanced across the board. 29% to 40%, some cores and threads hitting 60 at some peak points, which is when, of course, you see that stutter and that GPU busy line begin to separate as well. But even then, things look pretty good. In terms of RAM allocated, we're at 11 gigs, RAM dedicated 3.8. So if you're on an 8 gigabyte card and you also have a somewhat decent CPU with 16 gigs of RAM, you should be okay if you're on a medium type of rig. In fact, this honestly works pretty well on the Steam Deck as well when we get to that section on top of that. But in battle right now at native resolution at high settings on a Santa 100 XT, we're looking pretty good. 68 FPS into the upper 70s as well, and the GPU busy line doesn't look too bad. The thing is though, when you get to other sections in the game and during the city, things tend to take a turn for the worst. Now later on after that battle, here we are in the main town, and as you can see, this is where a lot of the stutter seems to come from. The GPU busy line looks pretty good, but our 1% lows aren't doing well, and we're even dipping below 60 FPS at native resolution. This is where I think the big problem of what's going to happen with Expedition 33 is going to turn off a lot of people, especially with lower end PCs, mostly because it's going to be difficult for them to get to this first opening section to then play later on in the game or visit other specific towns and areas with multiple NPCs. This needs to be fixed directly in order for them to go ahead and have a good experience overall. But again, as we get into the next section, you're going to be seeing a little bit of a better area and a little bit better performance moving forward. So I don't want to spoil anything for anybody. We'll jump forward from there. So once we are out of the town and actually into the area where you are going to be exploring the game for the most part, we're getting much better performance, especially at native resolution. As you can see here, we're going to make a couple of quick changes. I want to knock everything down to medium for upscaling with TSR just to see what it looks like. We went from 80 FPS to 108 FPS. So we do have some room with our CPU for upscaling resolution. In fact, if we go even further, we're going to go down to 50% upscaling with TSR, and we're going to be jumping up to around 144 FPS, which means that CPU wise, we are looking rather good. The GPU busy line looks great. And once you are out of that opening area and into the main meat of the game, things tend to look much better, and the actual frame time and frame graph and the stutters also begin to be a lot lessened and look a lot better, especially with the amount of the ability to go ahead and use upscaling in a much more drastic way. Things look really good and perform really well. Now, you don't want to play this game at 50% upscaling resolution, but the thing is, if you have a good CPU, you definitely can. Like I said before, the stutters that we were dealing with before in the main area are basically gone. Battles are feeling rather good. There's only one thing though, is when I use the W key, there's a bit of a delay between actually using that key to going ahead and getting to the actual skills menu. Kind of weird also with the items as well. Just something I've just noticed as well. I'm not sure if it's just because me being just me or what I've noticed here, but controller feels definitely better in terms of combat rather than the actual keyboard and mouse does. But again, not that many stutters, not that many concerns, and of course, really good CPU headroom still left while playing at 50% upscaled resolution from 1440p, and of course, still looking really good on CPU cores and threads. So not bad overall once we're out of that main first section, or when you have a lot less NPCs in the area. Now, of course, once that battle is done, we went back down to 75% resolution upscaling, which is of course the standard of what you're going to be seeing for the default in settings, and things look rather good in certain smaller areas. 89 to 90 FPS, which is really great. The GPU busy line looks good. The stutters, even though sometimes they do show up, are not as drastic as we were seeing before, and I would consider this to be in the playable section. Not the best, but of course you would have a better experience overall with upscaling. This is almost like the most frustrating thing about this game, because honestly, the game looks fantastic. The game plays really well. The ideas and concepts are awesome. But the problem is these small little micro stutters that get in your way consistently while you're playing just ruin the experience overall. I was more frustrated and angry, not because I was getting stutters, but because this game is honestly so cool that I just wanted it to be a fantastic port, that I really was just shooting for it to be so good. But unfortunately, Unreal Engine is rearing its ugly head here and there. If they were to do some patches and get the stutters out, even though they are minimal compared to what we saw in the main certain towns early on, then the experience would be infinitely better, and this game would honestly be a contender, in my opinion, for Game of the Year, even by playing it in the first few hours. I was incredibly impressed with a lot of the writing early on, the voice acting, the visuals, everything else, and the part that got me so angry was that I was just like, how could you let this stutter happen? Like, it could be so much better, and that's really the part that I was most frustrated about. But as you can see, though, even playing it again at native resolution here with 72 FPS to 60 FPS, it could be so much better optimized GPU-wise, but it's also not the worst that I've seen with Unreal Engine, like we saw recently with the Elder Scrolls Oblivion Remastered. That was really bad. This is not as great, but still could be a lot better, and hopefully things do get to be ironed out and do get to change, because that would really be great for this game directly. But let's see how it looks on the Steam Deck. Now, on the Steam Deck, things are kind of weird, as Unreal Engine always tends to be. Things are much more washed out. We're playing on low settings. We're getting a basically locked 30 FPS pretty much most of the time, and the frame time stutters aren't as drastic as we saw before. Now, in the main town area, I highly would not recommend it, because I was getting into the 15s and 18s in FPS in certain sections, and the stutters were really dramatic as well. So not that really good of a look. The thing is, though, that first area is so heavy, and anytime you get into a town, it becomes so incredibly heavy that the game seems to be almost unplayable on the deck in certain sections, and even then in certain lower end configurations on PC. However, though, in the actual game itself, things do look much better. We're sitting around 56 to 60% usage on the CPU and GPU for cores and threads. The frame time graph is much easier to deal with than we were seeing before, especially in these certain sections, most notably because it seems like everything's more sheltered and closed off and not as open as other sections were, and things look better overall in just the terms of the frame time graph as well. I really wouldn't recommend playing it in this way, mostly because visually it kind of gets muddled and ruined from what we're trying to see. A lot of granularity showing up, colors look washed out and weird, things don't even look right, and I don't think this is actually verified for the deck, even though it really doesn't even matter if it is or isn't. The thing is, though, Unreal Engine 5 has a lot of problems, and the Steam Deck has been showing its age, I guess you could say. But the thing is, a lot of other developers need to start realizing that people don't have the highest end hardware in order to go ahead and run games at the fidelity that they want them to see. So personally, I would rather recommend, if you have a better PC, to stream it directly from the PC to your deck. If you don't have any other option, then you're basically locked to 30 FPS, which I really don't like at all. I feel like a happy medium more than anything is 40 FPS, even though people have tried to get me with a gotcha on that, and they don't really know what they're talking about. So yeah, 30 FPS on this game, I really wouldn't recommend. 40 would have been a much better way of doing it if we were to have a bit more optimization on that end, but still, the game looks great. The game has, from what I can see so far, a phenomenal story. And even though there are stutters that are apparent, it is not as drastic as what we've seen with other Unreal Engine 5 games when you're out of the first zone and more into the gameplay world itself. So not the best port. It's honestly almost there, and I'm actually kind of rooting for it to get better. Hopefully the devs can go ahead and provide better patches, we get a better experience overall, and things would actually be great for this game, because I really feel like this could be one of the great contenders for this year, because man, it's honestly really cool. I'm sorry, it's really cool. If you're into JRPGs, this game seems to be it. But let me know what you guys are dealing with in the comment section down below, how you guys are dealing with it as well, if you're getting any stutters, or am I just the only one? And I also love everybody being like, no stutters for me, plays fine on my console. Well, this isn't a console channel, it's a PC channel, so I don't know why you would say that. You don't even get the same options I do. But with all that being said, though, if you want to see more of this kind of content, more PC port reviews, gaming news, Steam Deck videos, and more, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you have a great one, and I'll see you next time.